to this beautiful snowy day, our last session of faculty helping faculty for this season, I would say, for winter. Um, the person who's speaking today really doesn't need an introduction. I think everybody knows him really well. So it's Dr. Guy Rouleau, and we're delighted that he was able to take time to come and present, which I think is a very exciting and very convincing topic. He, as you all know, Guy is the chief of neurology and neurosurgery. He's the director of the Neuro, and he's also the co-founder of the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute. And open science is something new for people. And as you know, the MNI was the first institute actually to ever introduce an open science policy. So it's going to be very interesting to hear from Guy, his choices going that direction, and sort of what the benefit is and how it has helped him in neuroscience and the benefit it has to medicine. Guy, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. So what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen where I have some slides. So does everybody see the slides?
Yep, good to go, Guy.
Okay, great. So essentially, I think essentially time has come for open neuroscience, and this is what I'm going to try to convince you. Neurological diseases, as many of you know, are a very large unmet medical need. I think cardiologists are doing a great job and treating heart disease better and better. Oncology is very complicated because there are so many different cancers, but many of the cancers have become treatable, some curable, and I think that there is significant improvement going on. But in brain disease, we're really not doing a very good job. We have no disease-modifying treatments for the most common neurodegenerative diseases. And so if people aren't dying from the heart and they're not dying less from cancer, guess what? They're going to be dying from neurology, from neurological problems. And so we're seeing an increase in disability, in the fraction of disability and cause of death worldwide of neurological disorders. I and many people are very frustrated, and there's a sense of urgency. So this is how we came into this whole notion of open science, is we need to shift the pace. We need to do something very different. So for us, open science is kind of a game changer with a huge potential for neuroscience. The idea is, there are a lot of good people working in neuroscience, a lot of good science is going on. It's not that there aren't, great scientists and great work being done. The problem is that the brain is very complicated and there are many challenges to understanding the brain. And unless you understand the brain and the diseases of the brain, it's going to be very hard to design disease-modifying treatments, okay? So our aim of open science is basically we need to advance basic science. We need a better basic understanding. And the brain, because of the complexity, needs massive collaborations and integrating a lot of data. And of course, to do that, it has to be available. So basic science needs open science, I think. We want to break down the barriers to collaboration, allow fast and reliable reproducibility of data, openness, transparency, collaborative approach, leverage big data, potential in personalized medicine, faster identification of novel therapeutic targets, and reduction of the time to early clinical trials. So, and in fact, it is better use of public money because let's face it, most of the research that's done in universities is either public money or it is donor money. So for us at the Neuro, we thought that open science would be a mission enabler. And our mission is to understand the brain, find cures, and effectively treat people with neurological disorders. Pretty simple. And open science, we think, will expand the impact of the research we do and accelerate discoveries. And I need to point out that, this is not a philosophical thing. We're not doing open science because it's a beautiful idea. It's not the goal, but we think that open science is a means to the end, which is to find cures. We were fortunate that a very generous person called Larry Tannenbaum and his spouse really liked the idea and donated to the Neuro $20 million to create the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute. And so the Tannenbaum, we have 5 guiding principles. So open science means many different things. Open science, in fact, is almost undefinable because everybody has their own idea of what open science is. So we at the Neuro had to figure out what we thought was open science for us. And so this is what it is: public release of scientific data and resources no later than publication. Principle one basically is an external research partnerships, and that is quite difficult because that's convincing others to do the same. We need to have patient-informed consent, privacy, and rights respected. There's no restrictive intellectual property. That usually means no patenting, but autonomy is respected. In other words, academic freedom remains academic freedom. And so if somebody wants to patent or wants to, commercialize or do something that is not in principles 1 to 4, well, that's fine, they can do it. Which is why when we started this whole process, we really started with an education, seminars, workshops, work groups, so on and so forth. So those are the 5 guiding principles. And for us, there are some components that are important for the open science that we do. There's the open biorepository I'll talk about, the open drug discovery, early drug discovery uh, activity. We have IP compatible with open science, as we're trying to understand what that is. Open access, of course, which everybody talks about, and open data, which is also very important. So this is a little bit of a complicated slide, but essentially this is the CBIG, which is the Clinical Biological Imaging and Genetic Repository. So it's an open repository of essentially our biobank, but it's a biobank plus. So you have brain imaging. Whoops. Hold on. I'm already on my concluding results. It's going very fast. There we go. So I won't use my mouse because it's very sensitive. So we have the Brain Imaging Center for the imaging, the clinic for the phenotypic democratic data, biosamples. And then we use a system called LORIS, which is developed by the group of Alan Evans. And then we have a public interface where people can go and look to see what do we have and ask for what we have within the biobank. It went live actually April 20th, the website for access to all of this. So after 4 years of open, we have a robust ethical framework. Ethics is very important. We have an open material transfer agreement. We have a de novo collection. This is a bit old. It's more than that now, but thousands of specimens, mainly Parkinson's and ALS, which were the ones we started with, but now also other neuromuscular diseases, MS, and healthy volunteers. We have scientific collaborations with industry. In fact, we have more industry collaborations now than we ever had before. And we're working with the Douglas to integrate the Douglas Institute Brain Bank, which is the biggest brain bank in Canada, one of the biggest in the world. And they practice open science, so it's really not a big change for them. And we're integrating the tumor bank of the neuro, which was a private bank, but we want it to be open. So the other thing is we've attracted multiple other institutions and projects again around Canada. So I can mention the Canadian Open Parkinson's Network. It essentially all the banking is being done at the neuro for the whole of the country. There is the Open Canadian ALS initiative, which is also going to be banking at the neuro. So a lot of pan-Canadian activities are going to be banking at our bank. Then there's the EDDU, the Open Early Drug Discovery Unit. So it's actually the first institutional platform that was completely built on the open model. It is essentially to look at, use iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, to make a suite of industry standard assays. So we work with pharma and with other groups to be able to build our expertise and to develop what we call disease relevant models in patient-derived either cells, neurons, or whatever the appropriate cells, or organoids. And we work with academic groups to adapt the research findings into assays. We do small molecule screening. Our focus really, initial focus is on ALS and Parkinson's. We're also developing intellectual disability and autism. This unit is essentially very tightly linked to the biorepository. We use the cells from the biorepository to make iPSCs and then make the different appropriate kinds of neurons or organoids and then use them for assay development. We have a close collaboration with the SGC, the Structural Genomics Consortium, and ADMARI, that is for the development of assays and high throughput screening. ADMARI just got, I think, something like $70 million in the federal budget that was tabled on Monday. So ADMARI, their neuro collaboration in Canada is with the neuro. We also interact a lot with pharma. And we have this 80-20 model. You remember I said the important thing is not open science. The important thing is finding treatments. And open science is a means to an end. But with pharma, they help us develop the assays. The assays are open. They give us the ability to screen molecules, which we do all in the open. But there is their favorite molecules that they will screen using the assays developed, and that is not shared in the open. So it's a compromise that we have done. So after 4 years in the open, we've secured over $25 million. There's another grant that we've just gotten that is not, we can't announce, for $7 million. We have agreements with ADMARI, as I said, the Structural Genomics Consortium. We have collaborations with Merck, with Takeda, with GSK, with Thermo Fisher. So they bring money and industry expertise. And we have collaborations with open science drug development companies, the M4N, which is meds for neurological diseases, and Y Kairos, which is a spin-off from the neuro. And we have a lot of people who are interested in this. So IP compatible with open science, again, no restrictive intellectual property protection. I mean, the reason is that we think that what we do is very early stage. So if it's early stage, the value is limited. And then why pretend there's a lot of value and make it complicated to share information or materials? Let's just share it and that's it. So we want basically IP strategies that don't block access to or sharing of knowledge. We're not against patents. Patents are important. Patents are fine. But I think we think that the pre-competitive space is a bit further down the discovery chain than what other institutions might think. So what have we learned? Well, one of the things we were told was our open science policy would restrain young researchers to join the neuro. In fact, it's a complete opposite. A lot of young researchers choose the neuro over other institutions because of open science. I think open science is really in the DNA of the new generation. So this turned out to be false. Does it prevent new collaborations with external stakeholders? No, in fact, we've increased the number of collaborations, including non-traditional collaborations, like for example, with AI. And many Quebec-wide projects are going national under the open science umbrella. Was ethics an issue? No, in fact, it's not. And in fact, patients are very, very engaged and find this are supportive and they feel empowered. Does pharma see the value of open science? Oh yeah, they do. They've put in a lot of money and more money is coming in. So industry is very much into this. Did donors get it and support it? We've increased philanthropy by 400% over the past 4 or 5 years. That's pretty good. Are other academic institutions reluctant to embrace open science because of a position? Well, in fact, you know, part of the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute is convince other institutions to join open science. And we have 3 Canadian institutions that are moving along the road to adopt open science. So the Neuro actually still remains the only open science institution in the world, but we soon are going to have others. I think 1 within 6 months and maybe 2 within a year. Also, Stanford's developed a new center for open and reproducible science. And so that's there. They also have a major open science initiative that's developing. The president of Stanford is a big fan of open science and is pushing it as well. So I guess the questions for the breakouts would be, you know, aside from neuroscience, could the practice of open science go across other parts of health sciences? What would be the benefits? What would be the challenges? I think this is something, I mean, I know neuroscience, and so I push neuroscience. I think it works for neuroscience, but I don't know if it works for all the other fields of medicine. And I think we have a varied group of people here. And so I think that would be an interesting. So the concluding remarks will come after. So I'll stop sharing the screen. And I think there's going to be organization into breakouts.
Discussions, lots of controversy. Now see where Guy, there he is, Guy. So could everybody in the chat who's the lead write in their name? I already know who was the one in ours, which was Bernard Robier. So I'm going to hand across to Bernard first to give some words of wisdom and what the discussion was. And Guy, there's going to be some questions, which please feel free to answer. Bernard?
All right, so I'm going to start. There was lots of discussion. Some of the key points came out that, in fact, there's a concern that this open science, open access. So open access is different from open science, but open access has led to a huge number of predatory journals and predatory meetings. And so what control would there be in the predatory science if everything is open? Would people be able to publish as easily? If you make lab books open, what would happen in terms of confidentiality, in terms of students being able to publish a thesis? So those issues came up. The second point that came up was the concept that in other disciplines, in many other disciplines, the advances over the last 40 or 50 years are striking, as you mentioned, for both cardiovascular and cancer, but that's true in other fields. Certainly in the field I'm in reproduction and endocrinology, the advances have been huge, very different from the world of 50 years ago. But yet we still look at Parkinson's in terms of treatment, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, not that many advances. We understand why there's such a need in that field. The third point I'll make is the fact that if we are going to have open science, there's a cost associated with that, which is not insignificant in terms of making sure that the data are properly presented and clear and available to others. And the people who have money, who have bigger grants, are more likely to be able to make their data available. And maybe if we're going to go to the thread of open science, there should be some fund available to help us make the data available to everyone. There are many other points, but I'll stop here. And if you want to fill in for any other points.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Bernard. Guy, do you want to address any of them now, or do you want to wait until the end you hear everything? No, Guy, you're silent. Sorry. Still muted.
I think wait to the end so that I can get all of them, and then I won't be able to answer all of them, but I answer some of all the different groups.
No problem. Johnny O?
Yeah, so Bernard raised some of the points that we actually discussed in our group, distinguishing open access from open science. I think everybody was in obviously broad favor of open science. Just the cost of open access can be somewhat prohibitive, but that's not a problem we can solve in the immediate future, but it's certainly something that needs to be dealt with because it's very expensive, particularly with the large journals. And so with that segue, you know, I think one of the things we did discuss was how we are actually evaluated and measured in terms of our contributions for promotion and tenure, but also other aspects of our career in terms of valuing somebody's work because it was in Nature or Cell versus an excellent piece of work that was in a journal with a lower impact. And so I think how we are measured for our performance, our contributions needs to be reevaluated in that light. And as has been pointed out by many of us, and Guy pointed this out quite rightly so, a lot of crap gets published in Nature and Science, and there are more attractions from those journals than there are from some of the other ones. So I think we just need to re-educate ourselves into how we measure our performance. And I think the other comment that came out, one last point, was that, in fact, you know, there was concern, young people are often concerned about, although maybe less so now than they used to be, about being open access and being scooped, and then that might damage their career. But in fact, experience tells us that, in fact, we shouldn't really be too worried about putting out our initial observations, making open access as much as possible, because as you'll find that once you make a discovery, the road is not linear. There are many offshoots of that road. And if somebody runs away with one aspect of a project, there's still a lot more that can be done in other directions, and you're never really going to be totally scooped. And so we shouldn't worry about those sorts of things. We have to reinforce that view of the bigger picture of science, and that there's a lot of room and not to worry about being open access or open science. I'll stop there.
Thanks, John. Leslie, I see you've written quite a bit in, but you want to sort of just highlight some of the main points. So I'm just going to go through the whole.
I wanted to write it down before I forgot. So we had a really interesting discussion. We agree with Guy that the open means a lot of different things, and you have to be quite specific about what you're talking about and think about which is the most important. So everyone agreed with things like pre-registration, for example, but we also agreed that it was non-trivial practically to share data, not so much putting it out there, but curating it, organizing it, and maintaining it and making it useful to people in the future or others, or even yourself again. And that there was still plenty of ethical considerations on top of the practical ones, especially for working human beings, whole human beings, in relation to, especially to, for example, qualitative research or other kinds of research where confidentiality might be especially hard to protect. We talked about as well students' interests, one way or another. One of the things we learned from Sherry Baum, who was in the group, was that this topic is am I allowed to say, is an important consideration in the strategic research plan that's under construction right now. I don't know, Sherry, if you want to say anything about that.
No, that's fine. No, this is definitely a big issue, and Sylvain is the one leading the charge on that. So it will be taken care of better than I could do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. I'm going to head on. Robert?
So a lot of the points that we discussed have already been talked about, but I will note a couple that we spent a fair amount of time on. I think cost and academic credit for some of this stuff is something that we need to work out. The people who do the less perhaps glamorous work of ensuring that things are that data or results are suitable for open science. They may not get the first author publications in Nature, but they may end up with a lot of downstream benefits for society based on their work. So making sure that the credit is distributed and the cost is spread in a reasonable way are things that we all still need to work on. There's one thing in Leslie's notes that I will highlight. There's a step beyond what I think of as research on whole human beings, which is research on whole human beings who haven't particularly consented to do to work on your research. So StatsCan survey data, RAMQ claims data, etc., are almost the next level of confidentiality, privacy issues from, say, clinical trials data where they've consented for that work. The last thing I'll say, I think, is just, others have mentioned this a lot, the degree to which this is a pan-university or pan-society initiative, the easier it is going to be to make it work. If everybody buys in, it's going to work better than if you try to do it on your own. So spreading it around McGill, making it part of the strategic plan, I think is going to be valuable.
Thank you, Robert. And last but by no means least, Fernanda. Group 5, Fernanda, where are you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I didn't, the theme song of 2020, 2021, you know, you're on mute. Yeah, so in our group, we were very lucky because we had an IP lawyer, Palmyra, and so she gave us some inside scoops on how to think about this. But one of, let's just say, of everything Palmyra said, I boiled it down to one statement, which is that for lawyers, sharing depends on the stage of development. Just a key thing, and everything falls into that. we saw in our group, we had a mixed bag. We have Gerhard Molthope, who works on ALS and Parkinson's, and for him, the question of open science really boils down to at which point in the knowledge translation process are we, so that things can be packaged properly to throw out into the world. Then we had Daniel Bernard, who's they've just discovered a new receptor in fertility, and he says that what happens with that, he says this is very much something that can be translatable, and there's a lot of interest in it, but there's this push-pull relationship between protecting IP, especially if there are students involved in the development of the knowledge, and the impetus to commercialize that, you know, McGill wants and every university now wants. So that's that kind of sort of tension right there. And then John Kildee, oncologist, who's developing or has developed an app where patients can access their information and decide whether or not they're willing to consent to studies, and that's highly commercializable. But the question is, again, when to translate this knowledge into, you know, an open science philosophy. And with John's comments, what came out interestingly was, this is a good idea, and there's a whole philosophical idea of when should I do this, but also it takes steps. It takes steps in sort of, you know, figuring out what are the steps firstly, what's the process, what kind of platform am I going to use to do this, and what is sort of what I gleaned too from what John said, what are kind of the ethical implications? What kind of platform do I want to use? Is it open? Is it commercial? What is the communication model? So these are more of the practical aspects of this sort of thing.
Perfect. Thank you, Fernanda. Guy, it's over to you. And if anybody has any questions for Guy when he's responding, don't be afraid to either raise your hand and I'll see if I can find you, or write the question in the chat. Guy, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, these are all good points, and all points that we've heard before, and don't have the answers to all of them, because I think that it's a work in progress and there's still a lot to do. I'll just go quickly over some of them. So there was a talk about what's the border between the pre-competitive and the competitive space. And that, of course, is very important. And I think that the border, historically, the border was earlier, and I think that it probably should be later, because the earlier hasn't worked very well. And so if you look at the income from all the tech transfer offices in Canada, it's about equal to the cost of all the tech transfer offices in Canada. And so universities are not making a lot of money, or actually they're not making any money from all of this. So I think it needs to be further down the discovery chain, and that of course it depends on the field, and it depends on the details of this discovery, and so that's very variable. The spread of open science to other institutions, of course, if we're open and we do 0.1% of research, well, we'll have no effect, right? You need to have the spread of open all over the world, and then when the more there is open, the more there's going to be sharing, and more it will be effective. So yes, so it does need to spread, and we are working on that. The point about how academics are evaluated is a very, very, very important one. It's linked to many, many different challenges of open science. For sure, the historical way of evaluating is not, even today, not ideal. And there are many groups, including us, who are trying to work on what would be other metrics and other ways of measuring how people have succeeded. I'm not talking about the teaching, because that you can measure in hours and with results, but I'm talking about the research. And so I think things like Nature papers are overrated and Cell papers are overrated. And maybe there's a lot of good work being done in others. And in our field, there's a guy called C. Miller Fisher, who his favorite journal was the Canadian Journal of Neurological Sciences, not known as being one of the top journals in the world, but he described basically lacunar strokes. All the lacunar stroke syndromes are all except one he described in that journal. So, and he became famous because of what he did. But still, I think that's a very important work, and that's a work in progress. That's not done at all. The cost of open science is another, and the complexity of making things open. I mean, the Neuro as an open science institution, is everything freely available? No, because it takes a lot of energy and money and the complexity of the data and all the different kinds of data, and the data needs to be meaningfully available. And so that is really a work in progress. A lot has happened with COVID, in that a lot of the COVID led to a lot of open science kind of tools being built. And we're trying to look to see what are the different tools and how they can be packaged and used. But that is a work in progress. It's a huge job. So making data meaningfully available is very difficult, and there are many, many different kinds of data, and we have not solved that by any stretch of the imagination. So that is a work in progress. But that again is, the more institutions who are open and who develop open tools, the easier it'll get. The other thing is granting agencies don't give you money to make things open. So I get requests all the time for, an antibody that I worked with 10 years ago. I don't have any money to go dig through the freezers and keep all of these and all that. So this is like, it's a very complex problem. So I think it's not going to be solved by one group or one place, but we need to have ways of doing that. I think AdGene is an example of one for an open kind of sending of clones, but we need more of that. What are the others? The open access. Open access is important. The problem is, well, the predatory journals drive me crazy too, like everybody else. But I think that the whole system needs to be destroyed. I think the governments and the funders need to break the impasse, and it doesn't make sense that journals make money from work that's paid for by the government and the intellectual work of people who then send it and sign over their copyrights. It's really all very bad. So Leslie writes that even the regular journals have become predatory with their spin-off pay to publish sister journal. Absolutely, I think, but this is a battle royale, which is way beyond the Neuro, I can tell you, and it is happening all over the world. And I think that ultimately the ones with power are governments, and at some point it's going to change. But it's a huge problem. It's a huge cost. I have 2 minutes left. I'm just going to share a slide, and I'm going to keep talking. It's just talking about some of the things. If people want to know more about open science, we have these 3 different initiatives. Open Science in Action, a yearly symposium. Open Science in Conversation. This is an example here. This is a series. Then there's what we call the Open Science Best Practices. So those could be, interesting to some people, and so those are broadly sent around. I was told that it ends at 1 sharp, so I think I have 1 minute. Ethics. Ethics, of course, is the non-consented people and the complexity of de-identification and being able to identify people is also a moving target. Ethics is evolving. Ethics, when I started in 1985, and now are like very, very different. So ethics is evolving, and I think these are things that are again way beyond the Neuro. They're society decisions, but I think that there's more and more feeling that all the data and like from RAMQ and such are, important for the greater good. But again, it's not me who's going to decide. I think I have no more time left.
No, you're done. Thank you, Guy.
Okay.
So
Anyhow, thanks, everybody.
don't disappear yet. Don't disappear. So thank you so much, Guy, on behalf of all of us. I think it was very good discussion, good interaction from other people. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for joining with the Faculty Helping Faculty series throughout. Particular thank you to Heather, who's been the wizard in the background, who puts us into different rooms and adds us here and does everything. So thank you so much, Heather. And I'm just going to hand across to Leslie for the last word, if she's anything she wishes to say, seeing it's the last one. And we're going to be sending out like an exit survey to see if people would like to see this continuing, or you would like something different, or you would like a different format, or there's no need anymore. All of the above. Leslie, final word.
Well, just to thank you, Guy, and thank you, Anne, for today's session, which was great, and to everyone for coming out to Faculty Helping Faculty. This was a response to the pandemic. It's turned out to be a super interesting way to interact with colleagues on all kinds of topics. We are interested to hear what you think about how this should run in the future. Sadly, it seems we still need a response to the pandemic, but hopefully the vaccines are going to get us to something more normal sometime soonish. Anyway, please watch for the survey because we do take your input into consideration in designing these things. And we'll see you soon one way or another, and hopefully soon in person. Thanks for coming.